Welcome to Back to School, a podcast where two highly opinionated design system consultants put aside their deep set assumptions to deep dive on design system topics. Climb aboard the school bus for a field trip on the history, the lessons, and the people that make a design system truly great. Hello, people in the chat. Hello, Sarah in Canada. Nice to see you. Now, before we start, Amy, we established last month that you're a fantastic and well regarded designer of content and chaos, but you're not a visual designer. What made you want to talk about design tokens this month?
Great question, Jerry. Largely because I know almost nothing about them. So this is really putting our back to school concept to the test for me today. I think they're talked about a lot. I've worked in teams where we're implementing token systems, and I've always felt slightly removed from that process, which has been okay given the role that I've been doing, but it just felt like something where I wanted to kind of understand it better. And I think what when I have kind of tried to research the topic before, what I found lacking in some respects is a good, clear explanation of what they are for people who perhaps aren't working directly with them, who aren't maybe used to coding. People like kind of product managers and people that I have to talk to in my work to try and sell the idea in, who maybe don't have that kind of access point for understanding them. So the aim for today really was to try and provide that access point. So I guess it's worth saying up top, the whole kind of concept of this podcast is about going back to basics and not necessarily diving too deep into very kind of complicated debates and things. And that's very much the order of business today.
Yes, I'd very much echo that. We're covering the back to school basics here. If you don't know what a design token is or you're interested in the history, this is one for you. I'd say if you're already creating your own token architecture using like Token Studio, maybe this isn't one for you, unless you're just here for the quality design system bants, in which case stick around. We're here for you.
Be lots of
Okay,
those today.
Amy, you're driving the school bus today. Do you want to kick us off?
I am. Do you know how much I love how much we've mixed the metaphors in this podcast as well? We've got we're driving the school bus, but I'm also teaching the class. So it's like no one really knows where they're at. It's just the most chaotic school of all time, which is fine with me. It's kind of how I roll.
I think it's a very
Um,
much back to basics approach, all hands on
yeah,
deck.
all
Yeah.
hands on deck. Very much a startup school, I would say. Everybody's doing a little bit of everybody's job. So, Jerry, I'd like to start by asking, what do you know about design tokens? And have you been involved in a design system team that was implementing tokens before?
Oh, okay. So I guess for me, design tokens represent small, repeated design decisions that make up a design system's visual style. They replace static values like hex codes for color or pixel values for spacing with self explanatory names. And tokens give you the layer of abstraction that you need for scale, and they're also platform and system agnostic, making them very powerful. In terms of my experience with tokens, when I was at Lloyd's, the whole tokens thing was just kind of kicking off, so wasn't so involved there. Then since worked on three token architectures, one at checkout where Dave Musson and I just over engineered the beep out of it and made it very complicated, but we learned a lot. On NewsKit, I inherited a token structure and also learned a load about tokens while I was there, mainly from watching our consumers apply tokens incorrectly or inconsistently, rather, and struggle to understand the sort of layers of semantic abstraction that we had foisted on them. I guess most recently, I worked on the system setup at an education company called BPP, where I worked with the engineers to build out a tokens architecture. I guess I'm proudest of that effort. We kept it really high level and semantic. They were just starting out and didn't want to overcomplicate things. But, with design systems being for people, I think you have to know your audience and not always take the fanciest approach from the start. So I guess that's where I am with tokens, some understanding, but I'm keen to learn about the history of tokens because that's something I've never really researched.
So interesting that you want to learn about the history, Jerry. It's almost as if you knew that's where we were going next. Also, may I commend you on a very well prepared answer. I think we've talked a few times now about our different preparation styles, and that answer very much highlights that for me. I think more effort has gone into your answer there than perhaps my notes for the entire podcast. But I vibe with the school of life. That's what I do. So, as discussed, we are going to start off today with a history lesson. So, we're going to talk a little bit about where tokens originated. Now, a name that's going to come up here probably won't be a surprise to anybody. Who do you think is the first person I'm going to mention when I talk about design tokens?
Gina, obviously.
Oh, how did you guess? Gina, absolutely, the godmother of design systems. So yeah, design tokens were first pioneered at Salesforce by the design team, which was at the time being led by Gina Ann. And the first mention that I could find of them online was in a 2014 article called Living Design Systems, which was published by the Salesforce UX VP at the time, who described how the organization had developed design tokens as a way of managing their design system across multiple different platforms. And in the article, they described design tokens as a set of files which contain name value pairs describing our design tokens. And these tokens are of different categories. So we're going to talk about this a bit later, but things like text, colors, backgrounds, borders, font sizes, spacing, border radiuses, and so on and so on. So when did you first hear about tokens, Geri?
I don't know, it was a bit later on, I guess, maybe when I was at Lloyd's. We used to run an in-person pre-COVID design systems knowledge exchange. I guess it's in around 2019, something like that. Now, I remember James Nash, massive props to James. His name sort of pops up every so often, but, he has made some serious contributions to championing token usage and, editing the W3 token standard. He did a talk on design tokens and why we should be using them and how useful they were for scale. And obviously, being me and completely dismissive of everything at the time, I was like, God, who wants to use those? That sounds really overcomplicated. That will never work, much like I am with anything AI related at the moment. So, I'll probably be implementing all these things I'm currently scoffing at in a year's time, but that's just the way things roll. So that's sort of that's where they sort of first crossed over onto me. What about you?
I'm trying to think actually. I think I remember being sort of ambiently aware of them when I was working at GDS on the WK design system, which was between sort of 2017 and 2020. But we really had no need for tokens in that context. We were dealing with a very kind of simple tech stack. We were only kind of designing for web, so it would have been kind of superfluous. I can never say that word, but I try to almost daily. I don't know why. For us, so I think probably the first time that I became like really engaged with them and slapped in the face with them was when I worked at Babylon Health in my first consultancy role, and we were trying to implement tokens there. And I remember spending a lot of my time trying to explain to various senior stakeholders why we needed tokens without really any practical understanding of them. So as you can imagine, that was absolutely flawless.
Oh, it took me a long time to get my head around tokens and their value. I remember Cristiano Ristali at Badoo. He used to also pitch in with these meetups, and he once did a kind of one-to-one design system, like design tokens for a 5-year-old call with me, and I still didn't understand. So it's weird because it's such a simple concept. I don't know why I just didn't get it to start with, but yeah, once I got it and was on board with it, it was fine.
I was trying to think about this as well, why it feels so daunting and so complex. And I think it's because, as we're going to talk about today, the level of complexity around design tokens increases really, really quickly because, token systems are necessarily very complex things. And I think it's easy for most of us to get our head around the kind of broad concept of them. But then when you actually start to kind of dig down into the weeds of like, how do you implement a system? What do you call the things in it? How do you organize it? How does it work? And what are the risks and the kind of benefits of it suddenly becomes really, really baffling and almost like a religion, I would say, in the way that it's kind of approached and talked about. So yeah, I agree with you. I think I kind of had going into this a conceptual understanding, which has proved to be correct as I've done the research for today, but not maybe anything beyond that. So it's been kind of interesting to dig around a little bit more in that, only a little bit more, mind you.
It, it was sort of funny I didn't get it because I remember, goodness, long time ago, like, sort of early 2000s. Do you ever remember CSS in Garden? This is a total non-design tokens related segue.
Mm-mm.
No, it was the site. It was launched in the early 2000s by, I think, a guy called Dave Shea. It was like a community site that showed what was possible with CSS. You had like the same underlying markup, but it showed how dramatically you could change the styling using CSS. And, lots of well-known designers or designers who have since become very well-known, like Dan Moore and Trent Walton, submitted designs. And I remember this idea of like having the same underlying code, but it could appear completely different when you applied different styling. This was just completely blew me away. It was kind of like the forerunner of design system theming capabilities. But for some reason, trying to learn about tokens, my brain just didn't sort of make that connection. I think if someone had taken it back to the sort of analogy of, your site can look, all these different ways, even though the underlying code components are the same, perhaps it would have sold it into me a bit easier.
Yeah, and it's kind of, as with a lot of things to do with design systems, I think we often lean on analogies, don't we, to try and help us understand them, because a lot of them are not kind of self-explanatory unless you're very kind of engaged in this world. So I'm going to move us into a science lesson now to hopefully give everybody a better understanding of what are design tokens and how do they work. So as you kind of said earlier, design tokens they're basically reusable pieces of data that store your organization's design decisions. And they're used in place of explicit values or kind of hard-coded values when building websites and applications. So if we were looking at a design token, what we would see are these kind of, they can get very complex, and there's often more than this, but at a very kind of basic core level, we'll see three things with a design token. So we tend to have a name, what we've called the token. We will have a value, so that's what the token represents. So that might be, for example, for a color token, it might be like a hex value, or for a spacing token, it might be a pixel value. And we'll also have a type, so that describes what type of token we're dealing with, like color or font weight or dimension. We also have kind of different levels of tokens. So we, at the kind of very beginning, like base level, we have tokens that just give a name to an explicit value, like I've just described. So we might have a token called, in your lovely example that you've put into my notes here, Geri, we might have a token called purple 50, which refers to hex value 5E, God, this is like an eye test, 5E44E4. And then what we can do is we can kind of then layer up those tokens using aliases. So we might add to that a kind of contextual token that references the literal token, that base token, that then references that value. So a contextual token might be ink brand, which is, this is the color that we use when we're, I don't know what ink brand means. Like, is ink the brand?
This was just a color paste image pasted in from the NewsKit website, Amy. I should have explained it a bit better. We had very semantic level tokens, and ink described anything you could use for type.
I
So
see.
that was
Okay.
like the brand color type. Sorry, I should have put something in there like interactive default or something that made more sense.
No, I like this kind of mysterious approach where I have to try and live explain your example without context. But yeah, so basically, we'll have these kind of like literal, like base level tokens. I think they're called different things, that level. I tend to call them like base tokens. I don't know if that's right or not. It's just what we call them in places where I've worked before. And then you'll have those more kind of context specific levels, which will then reference those base tokens, but also describe the intended use for them. So you might have a contextual token called something like primary button background or something, which tells the person using the token that that's the context that it should be used in. So anything to add to that?
I guess for me, there's often three layers. You've got your kind of, as you say, you start with, like your base hex value. You might have a sort of literal token, what it actually is, like a ramp value, and then a decision or contextual token, like I said, interactive default or something generic or kind of semantic and more high level. You sometimes have a fourth or even fifth level of component specific tokens, like you were saying. Something like, I don't know, button, primary, default, background. So, people know exactly where to apply it. I
Hmm.
guess the difficulty, we'll probably get into naming later, but when you get down to a component specific value, it becomes really complex. If you were trying to manage it in a tool like Figma, you'd struggle without something like Token Studio plugin to actually organize it for you. The upside to having component specific tokens is the API just sort of becomes very predictable. Like anyone looking at it would know that that was the background color on a primary button without you having to explain it. I think the difficult thing when you get into the sort of woolly semantic level in the middle is, can you apply this to text? Can you apply it to backgrounds? What do you apply it to? Can you apply it to anything? In this, in that case, it's fine. But I think this is where it starts becoming very complex. And this is where my sort of thinking originally fell over.
Yeah, this is where my brain starts to grind to a halt, completely out of my
I
control.
I look like I've lost you already there.
No, not at all. But it's, as you say, I think is this stuff which is what makes it so inherently complex and so necessarily kind of strategic. It's very, I think we have to be very purposeful with tokens. And it's one of those things where I think while most of us can grasp, as we've talked about, the kind of conceptual side of tokens, we can understand what they're for and broadly how they work. I think it's this detail when you start to actually build and scale a token system where you really do need to know what you're doing. So I certainly hope no one ever asked me to do this, but I will very happily cheer on from the sidelines in any team I work in that are implementing tokens. So let's talk a little bit about how design tokens actually work. So we talked about what they are. They're basically pieces of data that represent explicit values, explicit design decisions. I think to understand how they work, the best thing to do is for us to start with an example. So let's use an example that looks at our lovely sponsor, Zero Height. Are we sponsors or are they just like the owners of this podcast? Whatever they are. The very important
very
people.
kindly allowing us to speak publicly about things, Amy. So
yeah, that's true. So lovely Zero Height, thank you so much. Now they use a particular shade of pink in their logo. Also, they use it for their primary buttons and for other kind of stylistic aspects across their website. And from what I can tell, although I will say that my inspector skills are not A star. The hex value of this pink is F63E7C. And so colors in design systems are usually defined in, this is something that you've added, I'm not trying to read it as if it's my own, are usually defined in ramp values on a lightness scale. Yes, I do know that. I actually do know that. So they're numbered usually from 10 to 100, going from 10 being the lightest and 100 being the darkest. So if Zero Height uses design tokens, then they might give their logo pink color or their button pink color a ramp value name like color pink 70, for example. And then what happens is anytime that a designer or developer wants to use that shade of pink in either a prototype or in a live app or website, instead of putting in the hex code directly or the equivalent kind of value, they would use the color pink 70 token. So tokens are stored in central files. I think either kind of JSON or YAML is the most common, and they only need to be updated in one place, which obviously as design system people, we love. We love it. We love to see it. We love things only being managed from a central source of truth. And so if there is a change that is made to the Zero Height pink, then engineers only need to change this token value and they don't need to edit the actual component. So what's the point of all of that? Let's talk about what the actual purpose is. Let's say that Zero Height gets a new head of brand that suddenly decides that actually the pink that they're using, he considers to be, everyday sexism, he decides is very ugly and garish and he doesn't like it and he's actually more of a pastels kind of guy. So if they weren't using design tokens, then developers would have to then go in and update every individual instance of that pink across every kind of button, every logo, every page and product where that pink appears. And understandably, this would take a lot of time. It also might lead to gaps. It might lead to something being missed, and then we're going to end up with inconsistencies in the end product. Sometimes it's worth saying that in like legacy products, there is no one who owns the repo to even make these updates. So this can really be kind of quite an arduous thing, and it really damages the control that design system teams have to implement the system that they have created. So with tokens, let's assume that Zero Height are using tokens. All they would need to do then is just update the file where the token is stored with the new shade of pink. And that change would then be pushed out to all of the teams that were consuming the token and then pulled in by those teams to wherever the token's being used. So it's like magic. Everything just gets updated in one easy step. And obviously, this makes it much easier to roll out design changes quite quickly. It gives the design system team much more agency, much more control over the implementation of their company's design choices. And a really important thing about tokens as well, as we've kind of inferred, is that they are platform agnostic. So they can be used across different platforms like web, iOS, Android, even in Figma with the help of kind of translation tools and third-party plugins and things like that. So that just makes it so much easier for us to make sure that our kind of design decisions are being scaled across the different applications in our organization's digital landscapes. We've talked a little bit as well about how design tokens can be used to kind of describe and provide context as well. So that's where naming becomes really important, because we can use the name of a design token to specify how they should be applied and how they do that kind of using aliases. So if we just build on that example we just talked through, we have the color pink 70 token. What we might want to do is make a rule that that color is used for all of our primary buttons for their background. So what we would do in that case is we'd create that kind of second layer component, that alias component token, that alias level token, which references color pink 70. We'd call it something like maybe color primary button background. That's probably a terrible name for a token. You get my gist. Which would then inherit the color value that we'd specified for color pink 70. How does all that sit with you, Geri? I've spoken almost incessantly for 5 minutes. You say something now.
I love how confidently you're talking about this, Amy, given that you once thought JSON was actually a person.
Oh my God, is this really the time? If they'd have said it JSON, then I wouldn't have thought that. But everybody kept talking about Jason like it was a person. And Travis, we also had Travis, which is our continuous integration, you know, the little squirrel that we used to And the other one I got was jQuery, who I thought was Jake Weary. And I wondered why everybody was calling him by his full name. So honest to God, I'm not joking. When I first started working in this space, but bear in mind it's like my first role in tech, I spent the first 2 months thinking that those 3 people were people in our team who just didn't come into the office.
I feel like this is some sort of therapy session.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to talk about it today, but you brought it up. So there you go. Oh, and let's not forget about Markdown as well. There was so many of them, and all of them men.
Alice has put in the chat, ha ha ha, this is so fun, which sounds a bit like a cry for help. Thank you, Alice. So,
sorry, Alice. I've let everyone down.
We're at a subject area called what's the point of all this? So I guess for me, the main thing, as you say, is scale. You know, change one value to affect any number of products. You know, tokens are device, tool, or platform agnostic, making them very powerful. You know, circling back to the thing of building one core component and applying any number of themes to change it visually, that's so powerful. You know, especially now me working in the accessibility space, it means you can have a high contrast theme out of the box, which, you know, or a dark theme. Lots of people are into dark themes.
You say that as though you're explicitly not into dark themes, Geri.
I'm not. I hate a dark theme.
Hate them, do you?
Yeah, everyone loves a dark theme, and it just, I think I'm just too old to appreciate them. They weren't around when I was young, so I'm just not having them.
Day.
No, it is nice
Fair
doing
enough.
a good color contrast job on a dark theme is very satisfying though, so I appreciate that. And they're also much kinder to people's eyes and people's monitors, so I should really get on board. And yeah, obviously so much potential in theming, tight or loose spacing themes. You could have the same underlying components for something like a financial services dashboard or a marketing website and just change how loose or tight the spacing is. So
Mhm.
yeah, so many upsides. Oh, Marek is also on board with the no dark theme. Woo!
All
Thanks
right,
for that.
team no dark theme then over here. I love a dark theme, to be honest.
Do
Everything on my
you?
phone is as dark as it possibly can
Really?
be. Yeah, I do. I do. My retinas get tired.
Oh, fair
More as
dues.
I get older. Yeah. Oh, there we go though. Yeah, exactly right. So they're very, very useful. They give design system teams, I think you mentioned scalability. I think control is another really important thing, being able to kind of control the use of our different design primitives, how they're applied, and being able to make changes to them relatively easily compared with a system where we don't have tokens in place. We have only talked about color tokens really here. We've mentioned a couple of others, but it's worth saying that tokens can cover pretty much all of our stylistic choices. So things like typography, spacing, border radius, elevation, things like duration and gradient. We can also use tokens to even do things with animation, I believe, which absolutely blows my mind. Animation is another area where just stay far away from me because I cannot understand it. Things move. That's about as far as I know. But we can use tokens to help with animation, can't we? Can we?
Oh, yeah, I believe so. I've never worked on a tokenized animation site, so I'm sure you can. If someone knows about this, tell us in the chat. Yeah, not my area of expertise. Whenever anyone says animation or motion, I sort of shy away because it's not something I've worked on previously. For me, any kind of animation needs to be subtle and to reinforce the user action. And if it's so subtle you almost don't notice it, it's doing a good job. But if it's something that you notice, then it tends to be not great. Also, accessibility considerations with motion too. So maybe that's why I've never gone down that road.
Yeah. We hate animation here on Back to School podcast.
And
Only
dark
joking.
themes.
And dark themes, hate them. They're out. They can't.
And AI.
We're cancelling AI, dark themes, and animation. You heard it here first. I'm sure that will really catch on with such influencers in this space. So, and we've kind of talked about this like one single token concept. So like, how a token might map to an explicit value, or you might have a layer on top of that maps to the kind of alias for that. But to add a kind of another layer of complexity, we also can have composite tokens. So composite tokens are made up of multiple values that are designed to always be used together. So for example, a composite typography token might be made up of a font name, font size, line height, and text color. So already we've got kind of 4 things that we need to add values for that form part of that one single token. So all of this is to say, as I've hammered a lot already during this episode, this means that token systems can quickly become really, really complex and really intricate. And because of that, it's not really any wonder that this subject has spawned a lot of debate over the years. And that leads us nicely, Geri, into a new segment for this Back to School podcast, where we stretch the school metaphors as far as we possibly can, and we're going to head over to the debate team to talk more. Don't you love it?
I love the debate. Were you on the debating team, Amy? I bet you were incredible.
No,
Really?
Geri, you've seen my commitment to research. Like, does it seem like something that I would? I mean, I'd love a good argument, but like to get to the point where I felt knowledgeable enough to participate in a debate would have taken a level of commitment that I just did not have. So
the third person in a debate team just does all the rebuttal from the other side. So you would have cleaned up on that. I could have been the first person that did all the research 6 months before the debate and just put myself through the mill over it. And then you could have just turned up on the day and everyone had thought you were totally rad.
Just sat on the sidelines going, "Go home, you're boring." Yeah. I was actually quite a good student. I feel like through this podcast, I've really sold myself as this absolute dosser. But no, I was quite. I did work. I did work. sometimes. So we're going to head over onto the debate team now. We're going to look at some of the topics that tend to cause a bit of a stir in design tokens land. And there are several topics that tend to kind of rear their heads over and over again. So even if you're just like I was, just very ambiently aware of tokens, you've probably heard or seen articles on some of these subjects. And the very first one that I want to mention is one that popped up, I think, pretty much as soon as tokens emerged into design systems landscape, which was, are tokens just spicy variables? What is the difference between design tokens and variables? It still persists. Like, it's really interesting to me that this conversation has been going on for such a long time. Even I remember it from years and years back, and yet I still see it happening today. So, Geri, can you tell me the difference between design tokens and variables?
Spicy SAS variables, Amy. Which designer or which engineer rather have you been chatting to for that
I
phrase?
I don't remember who originally said it, but I feel like I see it come out of Stu Robson's mouth a lot. But I don't think, but I will specify, I don't think that Stu subscribes to the idea that they are just spicy SAS variables, but I think he says it in a way that is mocking people who do.
Okay.
I think I might, Stu Robson, if you hear this and you want to issue a correction, let us know and we'll put it in the next podcast.
Yeah, fair dues. I guess as far as my technical understanding goes, which is limited, design variables are used in CSS to define a value, that can be reused in a style sheet like colors or fonts. And they're often, scoped to a specific element or components. Whereas a design token is platform or code agnostic. Tokens can be transformed and applied to anything. So I guess for me, they're more kind of holistic or centralized way of managing styling. As you say, you can make changes system wide without touching individual files or style sheets across your whole ecosystem. Tokens are obviously a lot more maintainable and scalable. They're, I guess, ultimately an abstraction of CSS, so a lot more powerful.
Yes, very, very good answer, Geri. I was incapable of doing that off the top of my head, as you've just done. So I, to answer this question, consulted two of my most trusted and most jaded friends and colleagues in the design system space, Dave House and Hayden Pickering, who I have to thank for this answer. So you broadly covered it. You broadly covered what they said in any case, which are there's kind of two main differences that we can talk about. So one of them is, as you said, they're intentionally platform agnostic. So they're designed to be used with different tools, different technologies, and different programming languages, whereas variables tend to be scoped to a specific technology. The other thing about design tokens is that when we say design tokens, we've been talking about kind of individual tokens, but design tokens is, as a whole, kind of more of a methodology. So when we say design tokens, we're really talking about the kind of that whole methodology of creating and implementing them, organizing them, naming them, and doing all of those things purposefully and strategically. And that's something that is really kind of worth holding on to. So when we're talking about design tokens, we're not just talking about the tokens themselves, we're talking about the whole kind of space, the whole ethos around them. So I hope that settled that debate.
Well, I feel like we've really
knocked that out of the park.
that.
Really, haven't we? I haven't had anyone representing the other side, but it's fine. It's all the best debates.
I guess to confuse things further, Figma also has variables. I guess to date, what do they support? Yeah, color, like solid color fills, number values that you can use for spacing, and I don't know, text strings and Boolean true and false. I think as of yesterday, didn't they start supporting typography variables?
Yes,
there's
I
loads of stuff
so.
all over Twitter, but as someone who's not hands-on designing, I just feel so disengaged, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
I'm sure the nerds are rejoicing, however, because typography variables have been on the Figma wish list for a long time.
I'm in a big WhatsApp group with a bunch of designers, most of whom are kind of UI UX designers, and let me tell you, it popped off yesterday.
Did it go wild?
This is the biggest news we've had all year. Absolutely wild in there. I just had to mute it, archive it, and take a little break.
Oh, I feel like the whole purpose of this podcast was just to stop being such cynical, jaded people, and we just spend the whole time moaning about things. I just
No,
need to get
I mean,
past
I
this.
love it. I love it for them. I'm just not, it's just not for me. But, shout out to London Pixels. You guys are super cool. And thank you for stressing about the detail so I don't have to.
No, absolutely. I've done my dash at the UI coalface where I got very excited about design tooling. I mean, back in my day, originally it was Photoshop I got excited about, and then it was Sketch, and then it was kind of Figma, and then I kind of rolled off hands-on design. Still do some bits here and there. I mean, like I said, that last contract at BPP, I did do quite a lot of hands-on. I mean, I didn't make actual components, but I did a lot of high-level styling and token stuff. But yeah, my role now in accessibility, I'm really opening Figma, so it's a different world.
Yeah, it certainly is a different world. What I really enjoy is that even though you're not significantly older than me, Geri, every time that we kind of do this podcast, I feel like we have a little ancient history segment where it feels as though
Old ladies' corner.
yeah, I love it. Makes me
Oh.
feel ever so youthful and young. But the reality is just because I've never been engaged with any of this stuff. I am old enough to have been. I just haven't been.
To be fair, you're not old enough to have been, so let's move
I'm
on.
old enough for Photoshop and Sketch. Come on, Geri. I was on Neopets. I was on Bebo. what was that? I had a GeoCities website.
Yeah, I had a MySpace page. It
Yeah,
was
I had
sort
a
of
MySpace
goth
page. Lovely.
emo
Yeah.
themed. Yeah.
Do you remember the controversy around deciding who your top 10 friends were going to be that you showed on your page?
It's just a terrible idea.
And then you
isn't
get
it?
bumped from someone's page and it was just devastating.
It's just, isn't it awful? It's basically choose the top 10 people to the exclusion of anyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel that way if I end up on someone's like close friends list on Instagram. When sometimes you see stories that are for close friends only, and I think, oh, how did I make the cut? Is it just everyone except your mum? That's what I imagine is going on there.
Everyone except your mum.
Yeah, well, I imagine like it's stuff that people don't want their mums to see. So it's probably like close friends only / not my mum.
Irving has said in the chat, things have changed so fast since Photoshop and Sketch, and then rather ominously, the gap is closing.
The gap is closing. I'd love to know what you mean by that, but
Yeah,
I also quite enjoy just the obscurity of it. Great. Okay, so now we're going to talk about another area of debate. I've lost Geri. Geri, are you still there? Can people still hear me?
I can still. Yeah.
You're coming and going, Geri, or maybe I'm coming and going. We'll cut this from there.
Oh, don't know what happened there. I just bounced out for a second.
Oh, it
was my internet connection.
Maybe it was the gap closing.
Yeah, maybe it was. So I just get absorbed back into the wall or something, into the gap. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Go.
Okay, so I'm now going to move us on to our next debate topic, which is, of course, naming tokens. Now, naming things in general is one of the most contentious conversations that you could possibly have, especially in the realm of design systems. And while I am generally an advocate, as we all know, for architecting and kind of setting up design systems in a way that really kind of takes into account the unique context that they're being created for, there are times where standardization, I think, makes a lot of sense. And I do think that tokens is one of them. And where we are today is, I think at this point, if you just do a quick search on naming design tokens, you'll see that there are quite literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles about naming tokens. And there's a lot of conflicting information within them. So there is not a kind of agreed upon way of doing this right now. So what do we do when we're overwhelmed, Geri?
Oh, I don't know. Where do we go when we're overwhelmed?
Whose first springs to mind when you think about feeling overwhelmed by lots of information in the design system space?
Or who would I go to for the definitive answer on the thing?
Yeah, who cuts through the noise?
Oh, Nathan Curtis.
Nathan Curtis, Geri. Correct.
Always.
Correct answer. Always Nathan Curtis. You can always rely on the Kurtmeister to just cut. He will not like that nickname. Sorry, Nathan. To just cut through the noise. And this is no exception. So we look to the design system's godfather. I called him the grandfather last time, which I would like to retract. So I'm going godfather now. So yeah, in October 2020, Nathan wrote a mammoth, even by his standards, article setting out a proposal for how to name design tokens. Have you read that article?
As you know, I've literally based my entire career on the teachings of Nathan Curtis, and I actually had this article printed out and stuck on the wall at one point.
Wowzers.
It analyzes lots of different companies' token structures, like, I don't know, Salesforce and Adobe, and it's got this kind of mammoth token structure that runs through all these categories. It was this color coded thing, and it was kind of burned into my retinas.
Yeah.
I guess the difficulty with this is it was an analysis of loads of different design systems with every possible kind of grouping across kind of object base modifier. It had all these different categories, and yeah, it actually really confused me. But I did the first token architecture I did for checkout, I did actually base it on a lot of this.
Yeah, it's a very good methodology. It's very
Mm.
systematically organized methodology. Like
Yeah.
any good teacher, I'm going to completely shirk my responsibilities here. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk us through the entire article, but perhaps listeners, for your homework, you should go and have a read of it, especially if you have to name tokens anytime soon. I really recommend it. Moving on swiftly to our next topic of debate, which is one I noticed that you snuck in at the last minute, Geri. And we love a surprise topic, which is a good question. Are you a real design system without tokens? Are you? What do you think?
It's a really tough one, isn't it? Of course you are. I mean, like, you know, if you're only running a single brand, do you really need tokens? Is it overkill? If you're trying to retrofit them into an existing system, it's very complicated and it's a lot of potential downtime. And, you know, it's kind of a lot of underpinning work you're doing with no kind of quick result. You know, it takes a lot of time to get these things in place. And, you know, you're kind of doing a lot of groundwork without people seeing the results from it. I think ultimately they're a great thing to have, even if you are just a single brand, because you never know how things are going to go in the future, or you know the way technology is going to move. And keeping things as sort of high level and platform agnostic as possible is the way I always try and go with things. So of course you're a real design system without tokens, but I do think they're a very good thing to implement if you have the scope. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, I think that, as you say, from a sort of future proofing perspective, it makes sense to have tokens. I think if you're at the early stages of setting up your design system, then in some ways, why wouldn't you? As you say, it's much more complicated to then go back and kind of retrofit tokens into your system. So that's where I think teams really need to be having discussions amongst themselves about whether it's worth that kind of investment in doing so. I go back a lot to the example of the WK design system, but that in that case, you know, it was a single brand and a single platform, web only. So for us to then kind of go back and retrofit tokens and introduce tokens, we never really saw a significant kind of return on investment for doing that. So we never did that. And I think it's kind of interesting. This is something that Gina has talked about a lot on Twitter, on social media and stuff. That I think, you know, people will sometimes come to her because she is, of course, responsible for everybody's decisions on tokens across the globe, and say in this quite accusatory way, you know, like, tokens are too complicated. We don't need tokens. And her view is, sensibly, I think, you know, well, they're not for they won't make sense in every use case. Don't have them if they don't make sense for yours. And I think that that's the line that we should all take, really. Like, assess whether it makes sense for your system depending on its level of kind of complexity and sophistication and your capacity to implement them.
I also think look at the knowledge and the skill set of the people consuming them, because, you know, I've working on NewsKit. It was so complex towards the end that a lot of the people consuming it just, you know, it was hugely complex, and it becomes a real, you know, monolith of a thing to get on board with. So you've got to look at who's consuming it and whether that's right for them. You know, it's like making a really complex system out of the box, or a really complex token architecture out of the box just might not fly if you're still doing like a what is a token presentation to people. So I think you just need to know your audience and what they're capable of doing, and, you know, what they're going to be comfortable with. Otherwise, no one's going to use it or want to use it. And, you know, it just becomes too complex and people just do their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it depends is
It
ultimately our
depends.
answer.
Oh, it's so annoying, isn't it?
As two people who've worked as consultants for years and years, it's starting to show, isn't it, Geri? It does indeed depend. It always depends. Okay, final topic of debate is an old chestnut in design systems terms. What is the source of truth for tokens? And as we know, you and I love this topic, don't we, Geri?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do I need to answer this because I made you answer it last time?
Go
So,
on. I'd love
what
it
is
if you did.
what is the sort of? Can I say it depends?
You may.
I guess if you are using Figma to generate your token values, and if you're using Token Studio, and you've got a pipeline going through to code, your style decisions are ultimately being made in Figma. So is Figma your source of truth because that's where all your styling data comes from? But then if we look at the flip side, product is pulling from code. So the source of truth for the thing customers sees is a JSON file. You've then got this kind of design token translation layer like Style Dictionary or something as an intermediary level that can translate token data from one format to the other. So yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, yeah, it depends. What?
It's a hard it depends from Geri.
It's
Yes,
a hard it depends. Yeah, if I
Token
had to
Studio.
do one, or it was basically just a death scenario and I had to do source of truth or death, I'd actually say Figma for token values.
I thought you say death. Source of truth for death. Death. I choose death. What do you mean you'd choose Figma?
I choose Figma like as the source of truth for styling decisions
Would
because
you?
because that's where all if there's a pipeline set up from Figma and you're pushing all your style decisions through to code from Figma, then Figma is the source of that.
Yes. Okay. In that context,
controversial.
it is controversial. It's not what I thought you'd
Yeah.
say, but interesting. Yeah, I mean, Token Studio, I would say, is kind of a game changer in this space, isn't it? It's probably worth just mentioning for people who might not be familiar with Token Studio what it is. I'm going to try and explain, and then you're going to correct me. And if I got it wrong, it was the test. So Token Studio is a plugin, right? A third-party tokens plugin, which is designed to allow you to have Figma be the source of truth for your design tokens. So you can specify your values, your kind of tokens, the stylistic foundations of your design in Figma, and then Token Studio will export that information and put it into code, essentially into the different formats that you need it in. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's also very useful for creating a token architecture. I mean, I found the last job I did, the actual Figma variable function, it almost looks like a spreadsheet, like you've got your different themes and columns. And that really helped me just in terms of making like a dark and a light theme next to each other, things like that. Prior to that, I have actually done it in Excel. I've got to the point where I'm just like, I can't cope. I need a kind of side-by-side comparison thing. So yeah, I mean, Token Studio is great for, I guess making a token architecture, keeping it organized, sharing it from in your design org, and then potentially pushing it through to code if you get that set up. So I think you explained that very well, Amy. I think they're also creating a tool to create design tokens, which is a bit more visual at the moment.
Interesting. Okay. Well, watch this space. Watch the Token Studio space. We are not sponsored by Token Studio. I'd just like to throw out there, but it's just worth mentioning because I think it's a big kind of player in this space. And of course, winner of the Zero Height Plugin Award 2023. So congratulations to those people. Now I'm going to whisk us into the last segment of today's lesson, Geri, which is, of course, a lovely little field trip. And for today's field trip, we're going to take a trip to visit the Design Tokens community group. Now, what do you know about the Design Tokens community group, apart from what's in my notes?
Oh, okay. I haven't even looked at this bit of the notes. Should I just read it out?
No. That's my job.
They're a W3C community group. They've emerged specifically to standardize design tokens, their format, the way we are referencing them. They've got a really nice standard going on W3C. It's sort of set out in your kind of WCAG format, so it's quite easy to skip through. And yeah, a lot of work's been done around standardizing the way that we, present these things in code, the way we, I mean, they're trying to keep it quite high level and, as you say, platform agnostic, but it's just how you actually, sort of structure and order things. That was a terrible description. I think you should just read yours out.
No, I actually don't think it was a terrible description. Like you say, their purpose is really to try and provide standards and standardization so that, products and design tools can rely on those standards and those parameters when they're sharing these kind of stylistic pieces of a design system at scale. So it's there really to try and improve standardization and therefore interoperability so that tokens can be exchanged more easily between the different tools across different design systems. So it was set up in 2019. It's chaired by three legends: Gina, Kalig, another name that comes up a lot when we're talking about design tokens, and Val Head. And in July 2023, the group produced the first draft, I believe, of its format module, which is what you mentioned. So it's a document which kind of proposes a standardized way of formatting design tokens so that they can be effectively exchanged through different tools. They released the most recent version on the 12th of April, I believe. And I don't know exactly, all the documentation makes very clear that you're to talk about it as a work in progress. So it's still very much subject to change at the moment. But what I really love is that they're doing this work in the open. They're inviting comment from the community. It's being done in a very collaborative way. I know they've been working really closely with some of the significant tooling providers like Figma, like Token Studio, people who kind of have a vested interest in this space. And it's, even though it is, very much a work in progress and it's not yet kind of stable, I think we're already seeing some real kind of traction. It's gaining some real traction. So it seems like kind of tooling providers and influential design systems are paying attention to it. And I've worked with teams who are already kind of trying to follow those standards. I don't know if that's been your experience as well.
No, absolutely. I think if we have a standard in place, and especially if all the tooling providers work to that standard, and I know they are, then it's just going to provide a much more joined up solution. It also just, the term reinventing the wheel obviously gets thrown around a lot in design systems, but I feel like every time I go at this, it's just reinventing the wheel again. If there were more standardized ways of doing it, then it would certainly help.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think, as I said before, I think I'm very wary about too much of a move to standardize everything across design systems and to kind of say, oh, this is all the same everywhere. Let's just make it all the same across all design systems. I think in a lot of cases, it makes sense to make more kind of unique contextual decisions. But I do think in the world of tokens, less so, because we are already sharing them between different tools, between different systems, different platforms. Why wouldn't we standardize those? And it also just massively reduces that kind of learning overhead as well. If you've got new people joining the team, perhaps with prior design system experience, it really helps if tokens are kind of organized and named and formatted in a similar fashion to kind of help onboard them to that quite quickly. I will also say I'm very impressed with the documentation. So it's having kind of read through it today in prep for this episode. I have looked at it before, but I had a proper kind of read through today. Even for a tokens novice like myself, I found it very penetrable. I found it very easy to get my head around and to read. It's got some really good clear definitions in there. So if you do want to kind of learn more about tokens, I recommend just having a look through that document as a start point. You won't really find a better source than that, I would say. What do you think? Apart from this podcast, of course.
Oh, of course. No, I totally agree. It's very, it's very sort of succinct, and some of the definitions of things, if you need to sell this in to a manager or you need to explain it in a presentation, there's some quite good succinct definitions of what things actually are and what they do. So yeah, it's a useful one. Again, it's really nice it's being developed, open source in the community, out in the open, which is, always the best way for these things to evolve. It takes time,
Always
obviously, but
yeah. Time well spent, I would say. Now, Geri, we are rapidly running out of time. Ooh. And I want to make sure that I don't keep you past the school bell. So we are going to quickly move on to our closing assembly, in which we're just going to share some ideas about where we think the future of tokens is going. What do we think we're going to see happening in the near future? Now, I put one item on my list here. So I'm going to mention that, and then I'm going to over to you for your thoughts on this, your hot takes. So mine is, as we've kind of talked about literally just now, I think what we're going to be seeing is kind of more standardization, which I hope will lead to better interoperability between different tools kind of consuming tokens. I think that this is a really good thing. As I say, like, I have mixed feelings about standardization, but in this area, I think it really makes a lot of sense. So I think we're going to see it becoming much less complicated to kind of set up and maintain token systems if we have this kind of standard set of rules and parameters to follow, and we're all kind of following that same set of standards. That's my hope for the future, and that's where I think I see things going. What about you? What do you see?
I think better tooling support. Obviously, Figma is evolving all the time, and then the tools that sort of provide the translation layer from one format to another, these things are evolving as well. I can kind of see a wider reach too. I mean, companies that are using tokens outside of product and things like marketing, super useful. Means you could keep a handle on things, with my accessibility head on, color contrast and brand, rather than people in marketing going off and creating their own thing. Obviously, using a consistent token standard will allow us to standardize usage going forward. So, yeah, that's me. It's party time with more standardization.
It's party time with more standardization.
Yeah. Woo,
Let's
that's
get that
just
on
how
a
I roll.
t-shirt. Yeah, I think that we got some good merch out of that, Geri. Yeah, I like how you said with my accessibility head on, as if it ever comes off. I don't think I've ever known you without your accessibility head on.
No,
But fair play. So, are you ready for our weekly traditional pop quiz?
Go on,
Weekly? How often do we do this podcast?
monthly. Thank goodness.
Episodely.
We did.
Yeah.
Go on, hit me with it.
Go on then. Okay. Where were tokens pioneered and in what year? You can get half a point for each part of this question.
Obviously, Salesforce with Gina. 2014.
Correct, Geri.
Yay.
Bonus points if you can name me the design system.
Oh, Salesforce. Can't remember what the system's called. No.
Lightning.
Oh, see, I should know that. I've only looked at it probably about 5,000 times.
You should know that. It's okay, though. We'll let you off. That was an unofficial question. Okay. What is a composite token, Geri?
Composite token. So a design token whose value is made up of multiple child values.
Well
so
done,
lots
Geri.
of things in one token.
Very pleased to see you paying attention. When was the W3C Design Tokens Community Group set up?
As in what year?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. About 2020, something like that.
2019.
Oh, do I get half a point?
No. What, for the wrong answer? No. No points. And then final bonus capybara question, which has become another little podcast tradition. What do capybaras eat?
I mean, I guess they don't strike me as predatory. I can't imagine them tearing apart other animals with their furry little paws. And, no body shaming here, but they don't appear to be particularly fast or nimble. So I would say they're herbivores. Do they live off plants like leaves and fruit?
They are, in fact, herbivores, Geri, but for a little added piece of spicy information here, I learned today, and I somewhat wish I hadn't, that they also, on occasion, eat their own feces. And the reason is, there's a good little scientific reason for it, which is that they don't digest their food very well with their little herbivore stomachs. So by digesting it twice effectively, it helps them to avoid that famous capybara tummy ache. So I hope none of you were eating during this segment. But
I'm never going to be able to look at a capybara the same way, knowing it eats its own poo-poo.
I know. They've let us down. They really let us down with their cuteness there. We'll forgive them, though, because look at their little faces. Okay. Geri, that brings us to the end of our tokens episode. So I am going to give you your grade for the week. I think you've earned an A-.
Okay, I'd probably give you an A- as well. I would give you more than that, but the fact that you prepare so last minute, I just can't deal with the chaos.
Stresses you out. I don't think I deserve an A- this week, so I'm actually quite chuffed with that. Thank you. Okay, well, A- is all round then. So thank you very much to Zero Height again for having us. And if you let us come back once again. Next month, on the 9th of May, I believe, we're going to be talking about naming things, everybody's favorite topic with absolutely no contention at
Yeah,
all.
I feel like I've actively spent more time naming a modal dialogue or a popover than I have my own children or pets. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to getting stuck into that one. I think we're at
absolutely.
time. Thank you for having us, and thank you to Kat and Liam for moderating today.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Oh, thank you, everybody.